Hey, it's Don the Auction Professor here. Today I'm going to give you a couple of bolos. They're semi-related. We're going to talk about some fraternal organizations just for a few moments here today. We're going to talk about the GAR and the DAR. Now, GAR stands for Grand Army of the Republic, and DAR stands for Daughters of the American Revolution. They are acronyms, so they are pronounced, meaning that it's not spelled out as G-A-R. It is an acronym for GAR, and you pronounce it. Now, something like FBI or DEA are initialisms, where you would actually pronounce each letter separately and not pronounce it as a word. So again, GAR and DAR, acronyms. Another big one that many people miss is laser. Laser is not a word, it is an acronym. It stands for actually several words. So look it up if you want to know what it is. That's one I've got in arguments with people over, doubting that it's actually an acronym and not a word. It's an acronym. So anyway, just a little breakdown on what that is. So if you ever need to know whether you pronounce it or spell it out, search out if it's an acronym or not. If it's an acronym, you will pronounce it, just like NASA. You don't say NASA, it's NASA, an acronym. But anyway, let's hop over and show you what we're talking about. So here we are. We're just going to start with GAR since I had it up first. Grand Army of the Republic, or GAR, was founded in 1866. It's a spin-off from Veterans of the Civil War. It changed hands and turned into the Women's Relief and several other organizations before it was kaput in 1956 due to no members being alive. So, that's close to 100 years after the Civil War. GAR is also a fraternal organization. Many people mix up Masonic with fraternal. Masonic are almost exclusively Masons. Totally different organization, one of the biggest ones around these days. GAR is non-existent anymore. The DAR is. So just like any other collectible, there's a broad range of items that were made to commemorate the GAR. They had encampments every year for many, many years, for decades. So there's lots of memorabilia, plates and photos and cards and buttons, pins, clothing items like this. This is a kepi. Sometimes they actually used Civil War kepis and they just changed out the buttons. In other cases, you'll see where people try to scam and they'll take a GAR kepi and then sew some Civil War buttons onto it. So you got to be careful. But this one here, $899. It's from Gettysburg campaign. So these are really interesting, really nice items here. If you run into them, you should know what that means. That is a key one that a collectible person's going to have to know is GAR. If you run into collectibles, buttons, clothing pieces, belts, buckles, flags, GAR you need to know. So anyway, this is a good one, $899 as I said. Next one, some more uniform pieces along with an image of the gentleman wearing them. Many of these are carryovers and could actually be Civil War. These are not. These are later ones. But they really go for some good money if you find some good condition ones. $887. I've just randomly picked 6 or so items from each of the groups just to show you some breakdowns on them. Now the next one here is a cabinet card. It's an image mounted to a decent sized card with a border around it. These could have just been set somewhere and you wouldn't have to frame them basically. This one went for $800 because it has African American soldiers in the image. Rather interesting one here. If you're unaware, the GAR was, I think, the first integrated organization of any kind in this country, the United States. So rather interesting image, nice, excellent image. Any GAR or Civil War collector would be proud to have this in their collection, I promise you. $800. Now, if there weren't African American soldiers in this image, it would have probably went for a few hundred and that would be it. So it's a big difference here. But let's move on. Ribbons are another thing that I run into. And if you've watched any of my What Sold on eBay videos, I've sold dozens of these type of materials. So dozens, literally. You can see and go back for a year, I've sold stuff like this. So I always look out for this. National Encampment, as I said, GAR, G-A-R, but $511 on this one. Next one here is another image. Depending on where the soldier was from and other factors, sometimes they can go for some incredibly high amount of money. Now, someone might be able to trace who this was and find some better information on it, but it's a real nice image all the way around. Just what you'd want to find. Now, it has some foxing, as you see the little spots in the background. That's called foxing. Even if it's on a book or an image, it's foxing if you're unaware of what that term would be. But $500, so it's a really nice one here. Now, flags show up as well, too, and here's a reunion flag from Michigan. People mix these up sometimes with Civil War ones, or again, they'll try and con you. So just know what you're buying, look into it. If it's dirt cheap, chances are it's probably worth it. If this was 20, 30, 40, 50, maybe even $100, I would still sink it into it without being able to verify it, because I would sell it either way. Now, DAR have been around for quite some time. Daughters of the American Revolution. These are relatives and ancestors of patriots who served, this country during that war. One of the highest items you will find are these diamond-encrusted ruby pins, 14 karat gold. Now, I've run into some of these, not this example with diamonds, but the standard one. They're only a couple $100, so don't think that it's not something you will find. I do find these many times, too, for really cheap, because most people don't first realize what they are, and second, don't realize that they're actually gold. Sometimes the marks will be obliterated by the pin attachment on the back, so you got to know a little something about this. But pins for DAR show up all across the board. DAR still exists. Pins are made to this day, and most of them don't say DAR on them. They're just figural pins of many kinds. Each president in charge of the DAR has created their own pin, and I'll show you a few oddball ones in a minute here, but again, these are key ones. This one with the diamond is just a primo example of it here. It has a nice backing on it. The whole works. Really nice one here. Some of these are numbered and ID'd to specific people, from what I understand also. Now, here's a grouping of just standard DAR pins. And if you see, it's the same basic emblem on the far left one there, but it doesn't have the diamonds. The diamond was probably for a high-ranking member of the group, and that's why it went for several $1,000s. But the typical ones just don't have diamonds in them, nor rubies. So this is just a typical assortment. These are more modern day, believe it or not. $208. So don't think they're not going to show up. And again, many of them will just say DAR, D-A-R on it, and that's it. So you just have to know what those stand for. And again, these are fraternal organizations, not Masonic. People interchange those terms, but they're very exclusive to what they belong to. Now, here's another example of pins. This was from a president. This was designed, it's a newer piece, I believe, from maybe the 2000 era. So again, these pins don't look like anything. You may not even realize what it is. You may just pass it by thinking it's just a junk modern-day pin, but they're DAR, so know something about that. There's books on these organizations. You can go to their actual page, and they should be able to tell you also. Stuff like this. Here's a good example. Garnet is a company that made a lot of their pins. So if you see Garnet marked on them, it's a good sign that it could be a DAR piece. Now, I'm not expecting everybody to run into these, but thousands of these were made. And they just show up in bunches of figural pins, and most people haven't a clue. There's a ladybug pin that shows up quite often. I've run into many of them. That's DAR. It's another one of these type of pins, and everybody misses it. It's like $1 or 50 cents or a quarter you're going to pay for some of these. Again, because they're generic pins. They're not marked Daughters of the American Revolution. Many times they don't even say DAR, DAR on them, so you got to know something about them. There's 100 or plus organizations that have acronyms for their name that are just like this, that are fraternal groups that will get you some good money. I'm going to go into these two here just because they're the biggest ones that you will find, and they have a big following still to this day, or a big field of collectors that collect their items. Now, DAR had bottles. Franklin Mint made them. There's other companies that made repo bottles as well, but this is Franklin Mint's version for the DAR. I do snag these up. They're in many different colors. You can get the entire set in all different types of colors. There's, I think, 6 shapes maybe with 4 or 5 colors in these. And any of them will sell for 10, 20, 30 bucks a piece, or as you see here in a group for 80 bucks plus free shipping. So, and just like GAR, there's plates, dishes, and stuff like that as well. This is like a tip trinket dish tray or dresser tray like other trays that I've shown you in the past. Most anything that's a dresser tray can be collectible, and that's a whole nother category as well, which I will cover in a future video. Dresser trays are something that I do specifically look out for, as I said in other videos, so I will cover that specifically, but this is just another example. Now, there's many different designs. It just depends on when the piece was made, what era of the Daughters of the American Revolution it was produced in. So these are just 2 ones to look for. Educate yourself on fraternal and Masonic as well. I will cover Masonic emblems and things like that in a future video also. It's on my list. I have over 400 topics right now on my future video list that I will be covering in future videos. So I am nowhere near showing you what's out there. There's just so much stuff. I could probably do the rest of my life doing a video on just bolos every day for the rest of my life and still not cover every collectible that you could run into or that we deal with. So anyway, that's what I have for you. Well, there you are. There's a real basic explanation on the two organizations and what some of the items go for. If you're interested in knowing more, search them out and look through comps on your own and see. It's a good area to find stuff in across the board. But anyway, that's what I have. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit that like button down below. You can also hit the bell icon to be notified if I post new content or go live. Subscribe and tell a friend.